Welcome to the book discussion for this year's All Iowa Reads title, Sing Them Home by Stephanie Kalos. This is a little experiment this year since we have not had good experiences with our two scheduled ICN performances. The first one, our technology broke down a few minutes into it, and the second one was last week in the middle of the blizzard. So George and I are trying this. We're recording it from the Iowa City Public Library, and we will make the DVD available to the state library, and they will make it available statewide to anyone who wants it. I'm not making any promises, but Iowa City Public Library is experimenting with getting some streaming video up, and that website is going to come up I think in March. And if we get this on that website and available for streaming, we'll sure let everybody know, because then you don't even have to bother with DVD. Technology, ain't it wonderful when it works? Like I said, I'm Susan Craig. I'm the director of the Iowa City Public Library, and I am co-chair of the All Iowa Reads Committee, which is a program of the Iowa Center for the Book, which is part of the State Library of Iowa. And I am joined here by George Minot. He is an instructor at Kirkwood Community College, and he's our scholar. So I get to read the book, and then he tells me what that author was trying to do. So I'm sort of the lay reader, and he brings some interesting facts and insight into perhaps what the author was trying to accomplish. So first I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about the author. Stephanie Kalos is a native of Lincoln, Nebraska, and she worked for many years in the world of theater as an actor and teacher before turning to fiction. She's a 1982 graduate of the University of Washington's Professional Actor Training Program, and she's been nominated for the Quill Award, Debut Author of the Year, the Raymond Carver Award, and a Pushcart Prize. Her first novel, Broken for You, was chosen as a book club selection of NBC's Today Show. I got a copy of an interview with Stephanie off of a website, and I thought one of the questions that they asked was interesting, and that you might find it interesting too. The question is, this is to Stephanie Kalos, how did you come up with the idea for Sing Them Home? Not that tornadoes are so unusual in Nebraska, but the circumstances of this particular one are so peculiar and interesting. And she responded that the initial idea for Sing Them Home arose from a photo in a March 1974 National Geographic, and from my family's personal connection to that photo. Until I was 5, my parents and I lived in Wymore, Nebraska, and among my folks' best friends at that time were Ed and Hope McClure. They lived a few miles outside of town in a 19th century farmhouse that had great historical significance to the community, and that Hope had lovingly restored and furnished with period antiques. I still remember a great deal about that house, even though the last time I saw it was in 1960, which is when we moved away. In 1974, in one of those examples of freakish tornado behavior, a funnel cloud came through, passing by the farmhouse across the road, bouncing over the highway, and landing on the McClure house. Hope, who had MS and was in a wheelchair at the time, was home alone with the youngest of her 5 children, who was at that time a toddler. The baby was found wandering the fields wearing her diaper, having suffered nothing but a few scratches, one would assume a terrible scare. Hope was badly hurt but survived. The house and everything in it was gone. So, truth is stranger than fiction. George, what did you think about the book?
It is a very interesting, big, fat, well-crafted, good-hearted, character-driven novel.
Yeah.
With all kinds of things to talk about, I think, in small groups. And I'd like to talk briefly about style and structure and the characters and a few ideas, a few themes that you all might want to talk about. For an author, for a writer, style is never just ornamentation or word choice or vocabulary or amusing anecdotes. Style is the language they choose to tell a story. It's also the way the writer sees the world. Style is also the vision of the writer. and how that writer depicts reality and communities and human beings and those deep mysteries too, at the heart of our struggle to be human. I thought I would read a few lines from the very beginning of the novel, which immediately establishes the tone and voice and style of this good long novel, and also tells us very much about what we are to expect as readers. It's very much about the vision, too, of the writer. It's so hard to explain what the dead really want. Not to be alive again? Heavens no, never that. A passenger buckled into that depreciating vehicle of the body, that cramped one-seater with its structural flaws and piss-poor mileage, its failures and betrayals, its worn, non-functioning, irreplaceable parts. Even the body's sensual ecstasies don't offer any allure for the dead, not anymore. The song, the meadowlark song, the sky unzipped by lightning, the silence that follows a prairie snowfall, eggplants, avocados, asparagus, sweet corn, the smell of warm Crayolas, breastfed baby's breath, the exposed downy nape of a child's neck, lightning bugs, infant's feet. All of this would be pleasant to remember. The dead were capable of looking backward, but they aren't. When it comes to time, the dead are tetherless. Like very young children in this way, they exist entirely in the now. They are blessed with an ability to be fully entranced by what's in front of them. Now that's a very fine beginning, of course. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? The sound of the language, the rustle of the language, the S sound, for example, the sky, the silence and the snowfall. We are in the hands of a writer who is able to control her language, and this is an extraordinary beginning too, because we're in the midst of dead people or dead beings, aren't we?
Yes.
And we don't quite know what to make of this, but this is a visionary beginning. And we have the hope not only of being in the now, but of being in the afterlife somehow, in some way. And so the themes reverberate almost instantly. Life, death. What is death if those who are dead are alive somehow? And here, right at the beginning, the dead are right in the moment. Time means nothing, the moment is all. And that's certainly one of the great themes of this novel that we discover again and again. So the style announces itself immediately. And the structure of this book is very simple. It's the year in the life of a small town and many characters who live in this town. 2003, it begins with a lightning storm and ends in 2004 with a tornado. And so it's a year in the life, but it also goes back in time to 1978, when one of the characters, Hope, is swept up somehow mysteriously and is never seen again. And then it even goes back further than that to Hope's diary in 1960. Right. So, yes, time here means many things, doesn't it? Structurally, stylistically, and that's one of the things that I think attracts us to this novel and keeps us reading, because of the time and the way it's elastic. It goes back and forth from the present to the past, even to the future, too. Style and structure, very important for writers, as are characters. And this big novel has many interesting characters, any one of which you all can talk about for a long time, yes, I think, in a small group.
Yep, I agree with that.
We have a doctor, Dr. Jones, who's a good man, a good doctor, who serves the community well. He tries to be a good father, right, tries to be a good husband. He is married to Hope, and Hope is a good woman too. She becomes sick with MS. They have 3 children, Larkin, Galen, and Bonnie, and it is those 3 children that we really follow, right, in the year of the novel in 2003. Larkin is an art history professor who has all kinds of problems and great attributes too. And Galen is a TV weatherman who is...
Not a meteorologist.
fascinated with the weather, but not really.
Right.
Too, he's as
It's
a
like
very
he fell into that career.
exactly.
It was given to him.
And at the same time, TV is important to Galen. He likes to look in the mirror. He likes to work on his body.
Right.
He's in front of the camera all the time, and he's very much aware of that and almost fixated on it. And we watch him grow and develop too. Bonnie is a forensic fictionalist, which is someone who collects things in this novel.
What's a forensic fictionalist?
She also has a juice bar, and she is wondering about her future, whether she'll be married, whether she'll have a child.
Right.
And who else is there? Vinny,
Vinny.
maybe another central character.
Right.
A longtime friend of this family. She's a nurse, so she works with Dr. Jones. A longtime friend of Hope, too. And as we watch her, her first husband dies.
Right.
And she is in very close contact with Dr. Jones. And as Hope's MS gets worse, Vinny and the doctor find themselves not only working together, but
In a relationship.
in a relationship too.
Right.
A relationship that Hope suspects, actually, doesn't she?
Right.
And almost gives sanction to. Well, she does.
Well, she does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the questions I had when I read that was, did she already know? And was she sanctioning something to make these two people, who she loved both of them, feel okay about what they were doing? Or did she not know? You know, it's one of those things, you don't know. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things about Hope, I think, is that this is a novel that has many points of view, many perspectives. Omniscient often, the beginning, which I read from. It also has a limited third person, so we're inside the mind of one character or more. And then Hope and her diary. A
Right.
very nice, intimate first person view of Hope. And it starts at 1960. And we see her life as a mother,
Right.
as a wife.
And I think that one of the themes that people could certainly discuss is our Hope's feelings as she comes to this small town that's very insular and very Welsh, and you know the challenges that anybody faces who is put in a place where they need to break into some pretty closed circle, you know, and you know, people tell her how to dress, and no, you shouldn't do that, and well, this is the way you should act, and she rebels against that a little bit.
She does. And we might say, like we said last year with Driftless, the place itself, the small town, is also a character.
Right.
Because it's rendered with sensory description, because it has a life almost unto itself. It's very important to all of the characters. And this particular small town is ordinary, but they have ceremonies including our little whales and fancy egg days.
Yeah. Fancy egg days. and I'm trying to remember the name of the contest that Larkin was the princess of, was it Fancy Egg Days?
Fancy
you know,
Egg
when
Days.
she gets
Yeah.
taken up on the chair. And, but again, that's one of the things that defines small communities.
It does.
And
And-
something that, you know, more sophisticated people might find like, well, that's nothing. In a small town, takes on meaning that in another time or place might not be as meaningful. Yeah.
Again, if the small town is a character, it's also a theme, too. And it's a good thing to discuss as we're discussing a novel, the place, the context, and then how we can identify with not only the place in the novel, but our own places.
Right.
And where we grew up and how important it was or wasn't, and whether we're still living there,
Right.
whether it's still essential to us in some way. And chances are for nearly everyone, their place is special in all kinds of ways. And
And the place that you grow up, you know, I think in the Midwest, in Iowa, we've sent so many of our children we've either sent them or they've gone, they've left Iowa. And that coming home, which, Bonnie stayed in Emlyn Springs, but even though they didn't go far, Larkin and Galen left. And this book is about their story, but when they come home for their father's funeral. And you think how many times that actual event plays out in people's lives. Someone from an older generation passes away, and those younger people who have distributed themselves away from the community come home. And what the interactions are between them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Small towns, family, friendship, deep themes in this novel. This is a family that knows each other maybe too well. And they argue and agree and talk with each other like families do. And the three of them are living apart. They're very much together, too, in spirit. Good things to talk about, certainly. Symbolism is important in this novel. Not so much symbolism, but the symbols or the things themselves, I think. Bonnie, for example, is a great collector of nearly everything. And nearly everything has some meaning to her. For Larkin, it's a painting, I think, that is a literal thing, certainly, the Annunciation, something that she saw when she was a young girl, a young woman, and something that transfixed her and really called to her. She is an art history professor because of that first experience with the painting, which again isn't a symbol at first, it's a painting, but it takes on meaning as the story progresses because it's so important to Larkin. And interestingly, the painting of the Annunciation, it has 6 characters in it: a mother, an angel, a monk, a nun, a gatekeeper, and a carpenter. And the place of this Annunciation is a very ordinary, middle-class environment, much like the little town. And it strikes Larkin that it's so ordinary, but how could it be? Because this is the Annunciation. This is a breakthrough for her, too,
right,
because it gives the ordinary some extraordinariness, something special. And the color of the painting, the figures of the painting are something that reverberates in her imagination. This is not an allegory. In other words, the figures on the painting don't represent the characters in the novel. But at the same time, it is interesting to assign different parts to some of the characters in this painting. The mother, for example, could be several of the characters. Vinnie and Hope, and then Bonnie at the end of the story. The angel in the Annunciation could also be several characters, too. Bonnie is angelic. She is found after the tornado in 1978 in the tree.
Yeah, there's something ethereal about her.
Yes. And as it turns out, and we don't discover this until the end, Hope and Bonnie really save each other and sing each other home. And it's deeply paradoxical because Hope dies, really, but she also enters another life. So we wonder if she really does die. Again, back to the beginning of the novel. What is death? Hope is still alive in her death, and she helps save Bonnie, who does stay alive in Nebraska, in this tree, which is another kind of miracle.
Right.
And then the other characters in the painting, too. You can have your own fun. The monk, the nun. Many of the characters are monkish in the sense they're very disciplined and hardworking and solitary and faithful to their particular profession. The doctor, for example, is monk-like in his discipline and intelligence and in his service to the people in the community.
And Blind Tom seems very monk-like now that you say that. Yeah. Yeah.
He does.
Dedicated to his craft and industrious, like you say, and yet will go anywhere and do anything, and payment is not important. You do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. And that makes sense because then Blind Tom and Bonnie who know each other very well
Right.
finally find themselves.
Uh-huh.
And they're both similar
Right.
in their attitudes, in their hopes.
And that after Bonnie has made her list of eligible bachelors, and she invites them to the bicycle shop. Remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I enjoyed that part where it's like you're going, no, Bonnie, not him, not him. And each one of them comes and has some fatal flaw, and yet she discovers, the love of her life, it was there all along. And had been thinking of her in that way all along too. So, I'm a romantic, and I thought that was, yes, finally.
Yeah.
So,
And almost all of us have stories, too, of how we found our loves
Right.
and how expected and unexpected our calling or our relationships turn out to be. In some ways, they seem inevitable. Well, of course, this is
Right.
my calling. And then other ways, we're surprised, just like the characters are surprised in many ways in this novel.
and it so mirrors, there's an incident, there's a section where Bonnie is she's discovering a wheel, and that's such a great artifact for her. And yet, just before that happens, it talks about how you see differently if you just move yourself a little bit. And she says it's like berry picking, and you think you've picked all the berries, and you move just a little bit, and suddenly there's a berry there that is perfect and delectable and ripe and ready to pick, and it's like, why didn't you see that before? And at that point in time, then she sees the wheel. But it's the same way when she's looking for a man. She didn't see what was right there in front of her.
And I think you're describing very well, again, one of the themes of the novel. If we truly see, if we move a little bit differently, if we concentrate, if we pay attention, we can see much more than what we might ordinarily. Again, the sight in this novel from the beginning is life and death, and death. We see a great deal. We see a great deal if we look carefully. And all the characters in this novel look very carefully. Sometimes at themselves, sometimes at a painting, sometimes at objects. And certainly that's one of the good mysteries here, attention. Attention must be paid to everything, because everything has a meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think of all the characters and the kindnesses they do for others that they're connected to, and yet they're just ordinary people, and they all have their flaws. And, Viney, how kind she is to Hope while she's sleeping with Hope's husband. And, Llewellyn's a character that I had a hard time liking, frankly. I really didn't like it, and I don't know, it'd be something to talk about if it was just the way, a sign of the times. But he kept the information from Hope that she had MS for a long time. He knew what she had, and he called up and consulted with other people behind her back, and you're just tired, go lay down. I mean, how condescending, I'm sure he was trying to protect her, but it just doesn't seem right to me.
He was trying to protect her, perhaps wrongly. And he also felt very guilty, because as a doctor, he knew what she was suffering from, and he also knew that there was nothing he could really do. There's nothing at this time that modern medicine, which he devoted his life to, could do.
Right.
And so he was racked by all kinds of guilt, professionally,
Right.
personally.
Yeah. And then he goes out and, when it's raining, and swings a golf course on a golf club on a golf course. I say he deserved to get struck by lightning. Not really, but you don't go out. I mean, it's like the first thing you learn: get off the golf course. if there's a lightning storm.
And you can talk about why he did that and whether
Right.
it was intentional or not.
Right.
And that's one of the questions about his behavior, and one of the questions we have about his character, I think. By that time, he did feel tremendous guilt, and it was almost as if he didn't care anymore, and he knew the risks,
Right.
and decided to do what he did. A couple of other themes that we haven't mentioned yet, certainly the ceremony, the Sing Them Home
Yes.
ceremony, which happens early in the novel because the doctor is part of this ceremony. He has died, and the townspeople come together, and the description of this part Irish wake, part Jerusalem wailing wall is very interesting
Right.
to us because it's perhaps something that we weren't aware of or didn't know.
Right.
It's different from many of the ways that we eulogize someone
Right.
or partake in a funeral. And this is a very odd ceremony.
Yeah.
Lots of singing, 72 hours of singing.
Wow.
Lots of
Since
celebrating.
I can't carry a tune, I thought, what would I do? And then I thought, well, I probably would have been doing the dishes in the kitchen or something, because they wouldn't have wanted me to sing for 72 hours. And it's not the same people, but I also think it's touching. It's, you know, it seems like, it seems very nice to me.
It's very beautiful. And again, at the end of the novel, the singing is a singing to death and also a singing back to life.
Right.
Because the people are gathered, and by this time hope is gone. And they're singing her to death.
Right.
But they're also singing Bonnie, who is up in the tree, to life.
Right.
And so again, we have life and death, very much
Yeah.
the same thing.
When the elderly man sees her in the tree, that's what he does, is to get everyone to come. He knows he can shout and no one will come, but if he sings, they'll come. And he does, and they do. Yeah.
Obviously, ceremonies, rituals. What ceremonies are important in this novel, important in the lives of the small group. I did think, if this is a strange ceremony, an exuberant, exhilarating ceremony at times, I couldn't help but think of the ceremony in Tucson, Arizona,
Oh, yes.
which was very much a celebration and also a eulogy.
Right.
And if you saw that celebration, it took place at the University of Arizona in the basketball auditorium,
Right.
of all places. There was lots of cheering.
Right.
And raucous laughter.
Yes.
There was lots of celebrating, too. The celebration of the people who had died, but it was a celebration of their life.
Yes.
Too.
That exuberance was respectful. It wasn't, you know, too bad, you're gone, we're here. But, I mean, there is a little bit of that celebration, I'm still alive. I could have been dead too. But, like you say, a celebration of their life and trying to say what their death meant. Yeah.
And it was very sad at the same time.
Right.
So we had great joy in the lives that were well lived, even if a few of those lives were cut very short. There was also sadness,
Right.
too, as there is in this book, in that ritual, in that ceremony.
Yeah.
And in many, many ways, that's a crucial thing in this novel. It's the title, really. It's very much what the novel is about.
You know, I know one of the things people are going to say about this book is it's too long. What do you think about that?
It doesn't read long, however, because of the characters.
Right.
And because we follow the lives of the characters very easily. We quickly are part of Larkin's life, for example,
Right.
as a professor. A good set piece at the beginning, she's talking with a student.
Right.
And it's a very accessible scene, a very human scene. Larkin, too, is a very interesting character. And she lives in shares a house with another family. And we're interested in her life. Very quickly, we're interested in Galen's life,
Right.
who lives in a way that probably is unfamiliar to most of us. He's a television personality. Well, we have a little interest in that.
Right.
That piques
Yep.
our interest. And so we follow him, and we follow him as he becomes a man, which we suspect,
Right.
because he's so youthful and so narcissistic at the beginning. We're convinced very soon, I think, that something
Right.
will happen to
It's
him,
like
that he'll
there's
grow up.
more to him than,
Yes.
than meets the eye
Absolutely.
at the beginning. You
Absolutely.
just think, yeah.
And so, if this is a long novel, it reads short because of the characters. And we quickly identify with the characters, we think about their interests. There are characters we don't like, and that's important in a novel. Sometimes that dislike keeps us reading too, as it does here, because, well, in some novels we want the bad characters to get their comeuppance,
Right.
and so we wait for that. That's part of the suspense. Here, we have the confidence, I think, from the beginning that if we keep reading, these people will deepen,
Right.
will find themselves, and that's part of the suspense, and that's part of why I think this novel reads quickly.
You know, one scene that I really liked in the book is where Larkin, she's unable to get on the plane, or she gets on the plane, and she's unable to go on the trip, and it loses her basically the chairmanship of the department, and you know that insight into how academia works, but the hardest part for her personally, I think, is when she realizes that this man who was her mentor, the man who was teaching the class, when she had her epiphany and saw this painting and said, this is meaningful to me, this is what I want to do. And she thought she was special to him, and that they had a relationship that was beyond teacher and student. And she realizes that she was not special to him, that to him, she was only, her glory reflected on him. And so he wanted her to do well because it reflected well on him. But personally, he really didn't care that much about her. And I felt really bad for her right then. And, you know, but what can you do? You move on. But, I mean, what do you think about the academia kinds of stories in here, themes?
That particular one is very convincing.
Yeah.
And Larkin has tried to control her life. She's tried to control her career.
Right.
She has tried to do the right things to advance. She has tried to control her eating, even though she can't, but she can still hide her eating from everyone.
Right.
So she's very much in control of that. She tries to maintain control of her body. At one time, she, as a teenager, was active in many, many ways.
Right.
And she has decided to discipline herself and control that aspect of her life. And she has tried to control her movements. She doesn't like to travel.
Right.
And so she has this nice little monkish life that strangely doesn't have much life to it
Right.
because of all of her control. And that's very true of intellectuals, certainly. We think we can figure things out and maintain our control. We think we can prioritize
Right.
and make a list and get through a day and maintain our sense of what's right.
Right.
And of course we can to some extent, absolutely. And of course the balance in life is disciplining yourself and at the same time being imaginative
Yeah.
and truly living. And slowly but surely that happens to Larkin.
Right.
She loves the family who lives with her in the house, and that sets her out of control. The incident that you just said, she's forced to travel and she can't do it, that sets her out of control too.
Right.
And costs her dearly, because what she wanted for her career is no longer possible because she failed. She didn't maintain that control. And yet at the end of the novel, she was at one time at 15, the queen, And at the end of the novel, she is lifted high in a chair. So she gets a chair, but not an academic chair,
Yes.
a queen
I
chair.
missed that one. Very good.
And she is lifted high.
Yes.
Again, she's out of control because she has tried to stay down and not fly and not be lifted. And she is lifted by people. And for her, the end is very nice.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, she starts traveling
Right.
at the end of the novel, and she's still involved with the novelist too, in some ways. And so her maturation is very fine. And again, very convincing in the academic milieu
Right.
and what happens in that atmosphere.
Right. Yeah. Okay. One of the reviews that I read of this book, the reviewer used the term magical realism. And I don't really know what that is. What would you say magical realism is? And do you think it's in this book?
Well, that's a term that's often applied to stories and novels that come to us from South America. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a brilliant writer, was able to fuse reality and transcendence in the same story. One of his best-known stories, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings.
I read that.
And the story begins in a very small village, a very poor village, and then suddenly a very old man plummets into the midst of this village. And lo and behold, he has enormous wings.
Wow.
And the villagers have, of course, never seen anything like this before. They're just people trying to get by. And who is this old man who's very old and decrepit, very ordinary in many, many respects, except he has wings?
Okay.
And the story takes off, so to speak, from there.
Uh-huh.
And so magical realism is a very real story with real characters in a real place that somehow is also very magical and special. And this story begins with dead people,
Right.
which of course isn't real. We can't prove death in the way
Right.
that this story begins. It's magical or transcendent or visionary.
But I like the way the author calls them the dead mothers and fathers, or fathers and mothers. You know, I don't know. It's like here's this group of people that are gone in one sense, but are still taking care of the community and watching out and you know, sort of like this benevolent kind of group.
And that idea, and it's not just an idea, has been with humans, I think, since the beginning of time. In Eastern cultures, for example, the ancestors
Okay.
are always with the living. They're very much a part of their daily life because even though they've died and gone on to another world, they're still with the people who are alive in their memories and their habits.
And, you know, the way Hope was, I find the circumstances of what Hope did before, just before the tornado. I mean, she took the pills, she tried to burn her journals, and it seemed like she started the journals as a legacy to her children, as something that she hoped they would read. It seems like in there somewhere she wants her children to read these journals and know about her life, and yet at the end she destroys them because they're too intimate. They're too, you know. She doesn't want to share that part of herself with her children. She takes pills. She lies down on the couch, and then here comes Bonnie. You know, and it's like, oh my God, oh my God. You know, no child should, and she didn't want her, you know, she didn't want it to happen that way, but Bonnie doesn't feel good and gets out of school. And it's like, at the end of the day, the rest of her family doesn't know what she did because, you know, Hope disappears and is never seen again.
Mm-hmm. When you put it that way, hope disappears. And that's quite true because for the children afterward, it does seem that their mother is gone, and of course she is gone, and that's terrible. And at the same time, their hope, their feelings also seem
Right.
truncated
Right.
and gone. They're cast adrift, and we watch the three children struggle mightily,
Right.
because you're right. Hope has gone in many ways,
Right. Yeah.
many important ways, and they don't know where she is. They don't feel a sense that they've sung her home. There's
Right.
no closure,
Right.
and that's what disturbs them and makes them doubt. Back to the diary for a moment. Hope is trying to give language to her feelings, which is what all writers do. They try desperately to incarnate what they think on the page in language so that they can understand what they think. And the diary works very well in many ways, because Hope is understanding herself and we're understanding Hope.
Right.
And at the end, too, if we have trouble understanding why she does what she does, there's that stunning moment at the end of the book where she thanks the MS. I am coming up against it now, the knowledge, the dread, the certainty. I am beginning to see my own death. I have the disease to thank for this clear-sightedness.
Wow.
And that's, in some ways, a horrifying recognition, right? How can you thank
Right.
multiple sclerosis? It's awful. It has destroyed her life
Right.
and her children's life. So when she's thanking MS, she's not doing so with sentimental affirmations. What she is saying is that she can see clearly, strangely. She can see the end, she can see death, and for Hope, that's something we all have to see in order to truly live.
Mm-hmm.
We have to recognize that our time is limited, we're going to die, and we can't let that destroy us. We have to be in the now, we have to be in the moment and live well and live within the time that we have. And that's what she tried. That's a hard thing to understand. It's a hard thing to write, too. And Hope does just that at the end of the novel. And that's very moving to us. That gives her life meaning, certainly, in a way that it didn't have early. Another reason to read the novel and get to page 500.
Yes, that's
You'll
right.
you'll miss what's important to her. And like long lives that you have to endure, this is a long novel that you don't just have to endure, but you have to read so that you get the full power, the impact of Hope's understanding here.
We can't close until I think we've talked about the weather. And I think it's great that we're talking about the weather, having had a backup date for this session, and with dumped, I don't know, Iowa City got 15 inches of snow or something. The book, the defining moment of the book sort of starts with a tornado, it ends with a tornado. You've got a lightning strike in between. Again, one of the very Midwestern things in the book, I think, is when Larkin goes to get her driver's license because her mother can't drive anymore. And she's with Viney and Hope. And basically, I really like that scene for one reason, how times have changed. The simple description of trying to get up the steps into the building because there's no ADA, there's no accessible, and they have to carry her up the steps. They go in, she gets her driver's license, and then they come out and it started to snow, and Hope just says, well, drive us home. And so she's never driven before. She's not even 16, but she's getting a permit which will allow her to drive her family around because of the circumstances. And she gets in a car and drives basically in a blizzard And where but in the Midwest did that happen? The weather is a character too, don't you think?
Absolutely, and it's also very much a theme too. And I'm thinking about Flannery O'Connor, a Southern writer who came to the Midwest when she was a young woman to learn how to write. She came to Iowa to the workshop, and she did not like the Iowa winters because the weather was too much for her. She was from Georgia, and it was too cold in Iowa. And yet she loved Iowa at the same time, I think, and in many of her stories, it is the weather, it is a natural disaster, it is a physical calamity that brings characters to themselves. And she said that violence, catastrophes were often strangely capable of making her characters aware of the motions of grace.
I like
And-
that. Say that again.
Violence, catastrophes were strangely capable of bringing my characters aware to the motions of grace.
Okay.
And that's true in this novel. And it's true in our lives too. Think of catastrophes, think of the very most difficult times. And it's often those times that bring us right to the core of who we are.
Right.
And we respond or don't respond, and we remember what we did because of its importance and its essentialness. And often it's true that our deepest selves are defined by catastrophes, struggles, things we can't control. And there are many things in this novel that the characters can't control, and it's their reckoning, it's their movement without control that really define them. And for most of the characters, there are many transcendent moments.
Right.
They do all come to themselves by the end of this story. They do all become aware of lots of motions, lots of blessings,
Yes.
lots of good memories, lots of good ways to resume living their lives.
Right. I think in the end, it is a very uplifting story. This is life. It goes on, the good things, the bad things, but the family at the center of the story supports each other, does what needs to be done, pulls in people like Viney become a member of the family, and that family unit at the end of the day is strengthened by all the people that they bring into it. Yeah.
And in a way that doesn't seem too melodramatic or too sentimental. And a good novel always renders our lives justly, for
Right.
better and for worse. And that means sometimes a novel is hard for us to read because it depicts reality so truly. And I would say we need to see reality. We need to see what's true in order to make sense of it and live better. And a good novel gives us that sense of reality. And sometimes we have to shield our eyes, really, if the novel's doing its work, because
Right.
it's so real. And at the same time, it's also magical,
Right.
because the characters see truly and then they make their way
Yeah.
and affirm life.
How would you compare this to Driftless? There's some similarities. It's small town. It's the stories are pretty much told individually. I mean, in Driftless, each chapter was told by a different character, or was the story of a different character, and it's a similar kind of style here, where you're hearing this character's voice and then you switch to something else, and yet they read very differently to me.
They do. Driftless is a better written novel. It's a novel that's deeply imagined, and the characters in Driftless are much more who they are.
Right.
And in Sing Them Home, we get fine language and good characters. We also get the sense of the writer's control of the events, which is fine. very fine. But in Driftless, I would say we get a fuller fiction, a more mysterious
I agree
place,
with
and people who seem to escape the writer's control.
I like the way you're saying that, yes, I agree with that.
The deep imaginative work almost always seems as if it comes from life, not a writer.
Okay, I like that. I think we've probably talked long enough here, almost an hour, and hopefully people will use what we've said and have a great, there are just all kinds of things to talk about. We haven't even touched on the discussion questions that are posted on the website, so if you don't like what we talked about, go to the All Ira Reads website and look at the discussion questions that are posted there. I think there's plenty of themes to talk about. As always, we're interested in whether you like the book or not, but most importantly, whether you found themes that interested the folks in your discussion group. And thank you very much for having persevered and finally seen this program. As we said, it was either going to be third time's a charm or it's a strikeout, and I think it was a charm. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you. Very good.